questions, I'll thank Luke and say that you may have observed during this talk that Luke is demonstrating his experience through his way of communicating those things which sometimes are a bit hard to get out of our mouth and describe them. He didn't take confusing routes off to the side. So if we're talking to other people about solar energy, the way in which Luke has presented tonight is a valuable way to guide you in doing so. So, some questions for Luke?
Thank you.
With solar panels, you have these tracking options. Is it worth putting in really cheap and inefficient solar panels and using a tracking option, or putting in expensive, efficient solar panels static?
Okay, your question is really, from what I can most interpret, is tracking. The issue of tracking. What is the right way to go? As far as being really cheap, inefficient panels, you try and not buy cheap, inefficient panels, but I take it you're referring to amorphous silicon panels as opposed to mono and polycrystalline panels, correct?
Probably.
Okay. What you have, one of your drawbacks, amorphous panels are quite, you find most of these products have their niche area. Now, amorphous panels have the major advantage of being very good in temperature. The price of the two, because of the industry, has come very, very similar. Before, amorphous was quite a lot lower than mono and poly. But where you're involved in temperature, specifically in water pumping, as a point, amorphous will outshine mono and poly, supposedly cheaper. But the disadvantage of that is the fact that amorphous is basically 3 times bigger to get the same amount of power. You know, the maximum output you're getting, most of the amorphous available you're getting about 6 to 8%. A mono or poly, you're getting 18%, 20% with these new fancy panels they're making. So the answer is no, because the structure of, I'll qualify that in a minute. The answer is no, because the structure and the steel structure, or the structure itself to track, is more expensive than the base product. But I maintain, if I had my way, every single solar panel out there would be tracked. Because if you look at the production increase of one panel or a group of panels over its lifespan by tracking as opposed to non-tracking, take out the feed-in tariffs, take out the other external influences and look at the pure production as opposed to the outlay of tracking, the answer is yes, I would. But obviously we have to work within financial constraints. Solar pumping performs really well under and off-grid, and there's a secret to it. Grid interactive, not so much. The reason that off-grid works, every off-grid I do, I try and track, and that is because there's a hidden advantage, and that is the cycling of a battery. The only consumable part of your system is your battery. In other words, it gets old. Now, the lower the depth of discharge and the lower the amount of power that you can take out of your battery system, the longer it lasts. Therefore, if you have $10,000 worth of batteries sitting there, if you can make them last 15 years instead of 10 years, you've saved yourself a lot of money. So if you look at the bell curve for a flat-on roof system, you've got something like that. You look at the bell curve for a tracked system, you've got something like that. So you're making all of this power, and what happens in this situation is when the battery gets full, or when the battery bank gets full, it gets to terminal voltage. What happens is the system supplies power directly into the load, Therefore, the battery is not cycling, it's not going up and down. So the longer you can keep full power on it, cut a long story short, you get another 50% out of your batteries. That is one of the main advantages. Also, variable speed drive pumps that start up as the sunlight intensity increases, right? You get a tracker that comes along, they're on full power in the morning and full power in the evening. So it simply increases the time. Also, you find a lot of tracking systems don't have the overheating problem that flat-on roof systems have, but then again, if you have a ground mount system, you don't have that either. So the reliability is the issue with tracking, and these days the reliability issue is almost gone. You can never say a bearing's not going to wear out, but there have been a lot of rubbish hit the market. There's been a lot of people have a go. They've got a very, very bad name. But I have tracking systems that I've built myself 20 years ago that are still sitting out there. The reliability of that aspect of things is getting better and better every time. And as I say, I would track every single that to that if I could, because you're making the panel work. It doesn't mind working. It wants to work. You're sitting it flat on a roof, it's not doing it. So, yeah. Yes, sir.
Remote off-grid, coupling wind power with solar power.
Hybrid off-grid, yep.
That's hybrid off-grid, is it?
Yes, that's called hybrid off-grid, yeah.
And this is in an area of low sunlight hours.
Yep.
So what's the difficulties in there?
Oh, none whatsoever. It's a simple and normal, everyday done thing. Oh, not normal. I mean, most people run off solar power, but there is absolutely no technical or mechanical constraints. All you do is you could look at it like this. You could, with that drawing I drew, is put another set of solar panels. It is an input, a power supply. It has its own regulator, or, it regulates. So it's simply, if you break these components up into what they do, and one is to supply, one is to regulate, one is to store, one is to blah, blah, it's simply another method of supplying of power into the system. And they're absolutely amazing. A good hybrid system is probably the nicest off-grid system you can buy. But I would suggest of 90 or 100 wind turbine sites that I go to, people who are off-grid, right? And this is not large systems, people that turn around and say, okay, I've got a house and I want to power it up. They say, we've got wind. They haven't got wind. They have got breeze. Now, the output of a wind turbine basically is exponential on the wind speed. The operating on these smaller turbines, the 1 kilowatts, the 2 kilowatts, the 400, the operating range has to be between about 6 metres per second to 16 metres per second, 30 kilometres an hour roughly. I don't want to get too technical about it. Now, people go, oh, I had wind the other day, I'll put up a wind turbine. But then again, there are sites where wind turbines just never stop and they're phenomenal, and they're better than solar panels. So my answer to wind turbines are site dependency. The sun comes up, all you've got to do is cut trees down, but site dependency is the issue. And a good wind turbine hybrid system is wonderful, easy. Okay.
You mentioned that at your house you've got about 180 kilowatt hours battery.
Yes.
Have you got a big load there, or what was the reason to get so much storage?
I just built a big system. I always wanted a big system, and I built a big system, basically. So, show off. There you go. Yeah, I can.
So how long can you run your house off that?
Well, I have built a solar house, and this is embarrassing. I built a solar house, and I have DC fridges because I've come from years ago when the biggest system around was a 1 kilowatt solar panel system, and a few car batteries. So that's my orientation, or that's where I'm oriented around. So embarrassingly, my household load is around about 6 kilowatts a day, and I run air conditioning. I've got a solar house with Hebel block, and it's very thermally efficient, DC fridges. So if you divide, now it's actually more like 200 kilowatts, 220 kilowatt hours a day, because depth of discharge. If you divide that by 8, I suppose you'd have to say, what's 220 divided by about 30 days. So, yeah. I'm sorry to. Interesting enough, 2 hours of rain fill it up. In other words, if it's a rainy day, in 2 hours the batteries are full. That's embarrassing, I shouldn't say. Yeah, sorry. Yes.
How much of an advantage is it if you can't actually track the sun?
Yes.
If you have a semi-stationary set of solar panels on the roof, how much of an advantage is it to do a seasonal tilt of the panels?
Of great advantage. Your horizon, your sun, let's say Sydney, obviously latitudes are all different. If you're going to the tropics, it's pretty much flat, but as you go further and further south or north from the equator, your elevation adjustment, especially with an off-grid, right? But we're talking about production of power, right? That really doesn't matter, make a difference between off-grid or grid, but to the functioning of the whole system, especially with off-grid, to be able to adjust your elevation to make your solar panels perpendicular to the sun is of huge advantage. And ladies and gentlemen, the reasoning behind this is really, really simple. And I don't know whether people actually grasp why this makes so much difference. If I draw a drawing for you, you might understand, or not that you don't understand, apologies. I mean, you might.
I thought it was minimal, but it must change depending on what latitude you're
It's the more that you go away from the equator. Okay, your seasonal adjust roughly is in this latitude somewhere between 30 and 50%.
Wow.
But at different times of the year. If you look at the output of the panel, but it makes common sense. You have a sun, and the sun puts out rays. All right? Let's say we have a ray every inch. You lay your solar panel, which is that big, and it collects 10 rays, all at 1,000 watts per square metre. Okay? So therefore, it's getting full power. Don't worry about temperature derating and all that sort of thing. So you have a surface area of X square metres, 1 square metre, picking up that power because your solar panels like that, okay? You have the same 10 rays and you have a solar panel that's on an angle of 45 degrees, okay, to the sun, and you're only picking up 4 rays. In other words, the surface area of the system or of the solar panel is reduced, therefore it doesn't put out as much power. So to answer your question, elevation adjustment, and you don't see it these days, it's absolutely, it's criminal really, is very, very important.
Well, even if you just did it 3 or 4 times a year.
Tracking systems, ground mount systems, they all adjust elevation, and this is now the stats on tracking, 30 to 40% increase on azimuth, right, east to west, and 15 to 30% increase on elevation. So there you go. So it is important. And if you look at you look at 30%, 15% over the life of the panel, and you calculate that into dollars, and if you're on a 60-cent feed-in tariff, you know, that's going to finish in 2016 anyway. So yeah, yes. Yeah.
Interested to know a bit more about the building of Vega.
Yeah, sure, far away.
You said you had 216 kilowatt hours of battery.
Correct.
And what's the sort of maximum loads for building at a time?
Okay. as in kilowatt hours, around about 20 kilowatt hours.
Just repeat the question in your...
Oh, sorry. You would like to know more details of the Bega project. The output of the inverters there is around about 20 kilowatt hours. So 20 kilowatts is its output. And as I say, the size of the battery bank is about 20 kilowatts. Can you be more specific with your questions? Because I've got lots of specifications that I can give you on it.
So the building load, though, what is the building load? So how much of the building load are you supplying from the battery?
It supplies the total load. The beauty of the system is it's fully adjustable. So it's programmed by a computer, and I am not a computer person. I will tell you that my other staff are computer people. But the system is designed so you can manipulate the output of that system, and you can make it punch into the grid whenever you want to, or supply the load, or both, or put the excess into the grid. So the answer to your question is it is supplying all of the power to the library. If there are problems, it is the library never loses power. In other words, it's on a UPS. It becomes a UPS. Any excess is supplied out to the grid. If you get onto the Beagle Library project on the internet, you'll see they have an absolutely fabulous website, and it shows you what's going on at the time. It will explain all of it. So if you want technical detail on the outputs, have a look at that website. Yeah, sure. I think that's probably confidential information. So I would be very hesitant to talk about that. It's not my position to be able to tell what they spend. I apologise.
So that's effectively an on-grid battery storage system. If
It's a hybrid system, yeah.
there was no sun for several days and it was really anything like that,
Yes.
you could just go back to the grid.
Oh, absolutely. That's what happens, yeah. You can manipulate, and that's what they're doing. We've built the system, and they're now playing with the settings on what they're doing with the power. That was basically the purpose of the whole exercise, was to build a system that they could manipulate to experiment with how they could supply, what they could do with storage, and when to supply power back, and what would happen if supply was power back, or pulling power in from the grid. So the answer is yes, it's grid connected, and if you had 10 days of poor power with no power, the grid will feed the inverters, which will charge the batteries, or you can also plug in a generator to the system, so that if you wanted to be totally grid free, you're still plugged into the grid. And this again is a bit of an issue, because with biodiesel and these modern day generators, you can produce power pretty cheaply. So what you can do with a system like that is, if you have a very efficient generator and you're in country energy where they're being charged 45, 48 cents a kilowatt hour, you can actually produce power cheaper out of a generator than you can out of peak power. So you can start your generator and supply it back to the grid again, make money. So, yeah. Have I answered your question? Thank you.
Question regarding the Bega Library again.
Yep.
Is Essential actually controlling the export to the grid in terms of evening peaks and stuff like that, or are they just paying for the profiles?
They're controlling it.
Okay, so how they decide whether to export? They look at, say, the current price on the national market, then export? Or?
No, they're not quite to that stage yet. As I said, it's relatively rudimentary. To re-answer your question, they control it, but they ask us to make the adjustments. In other words, it's not to the stage where they can sit on a computer, right? It actually is, but they haven't asked us to do that and alter the settings. So at this point in time, it's still very, very new. So I would envisage that the development of that project is soon we will be asked to start to manipulate on their demand the settings. At the moment, they're trying different settings. They're not moving it around. And I think what happened is that new management went right through, and their R&D budget got cut pretty heavily, so the whole thing sort of gone from being high profile to being low profile. So it's
You might just,
One more question, just,
yeah,
is it the 4 point
just a
inverter
couple more
or-
questions.
Sorry.
I
Is
beg-
it 4 point inverter?
I beg pardon?
It's the 4 point inverter. Can you control the voltage as well? And the,
Yes.
output?
Yes, yes. That you can control your output voltage, yeah, and frequency.
I just had a sort of another kind of a hybrid question.
Yeah, sure.
I was just interested in, like in the urban setting in Sydney, I'm quite interested in putting some off-grid around the house to power the pool pump, you know, near the garden lighting.
We're getting asked every
Is that
day.
something you're doing? And are there
We're getting asked every day, yeah.
solutions? And if we want to do it ourselves, where do we buy the bits?
Talk to me. And pumping, if you want to pump your pool, don't do it through the grid. Solar pump, variable speed drive, blah, blah.
So this is
You-
happening in that sort of, because it seems an ideal thing for the city.
You speak to, if you ask 99% of people in this industry, solar people, they'll go, "Blah, blah." Speak to us, that's what we do. Yes, sir.
With my roof juice, when the electricity comes out in the network,
With your roof juice.
yes,
Yes. Yep.
solar
Sorry.
panel,
Yep.
when it conks out, when the grid conks out,
Yes.
the law is...
Yes, there's an anti-islanding equipment that automatically cuts that out.
With your beta system, that really can't act as a UPS if the grid cuts out.
That is correct. This is why it is an illegal system. Okay? And you know the reason why that all inverters have a 30 millisecond contactor or anti-islanding? Do you know what the purpose of that is?
So you don't electrocute the person down the street.
You get people working on the lines, by law they have to have anti-islanding, and that you can't have it any other way. Bega is a highly experimental project, and it's been quite good.
We're going to have to finish soon, but there's 2 hands up at the moment, and I'm sure...
I'm not answering your question, Max. I don't want you to ask me a hard one.
Speak to Luke after this, because we'll get a chance to all have a chat, and we've still got nibblies out there, so we'll go with this fellow.
Yes, mate.
I was wondering, have you got a levelised cost of electricity from standalone systems? And you know, how fast is that dropping?
Yeah, that's a good question, Stuart. Levelised cost over a period of time. You're putting a time based into it. In other words, what does it cost? What does it cost? It's very difficult. I can give you that. No, off grid. The trouble is that the technology is changing so fast. So, therefore, what I'll have to do is go back and revisit it, because you see, a solar panel was $2,000. It's now basically $200. I haven't done that calculation on off-grids for about 4 years. So I'm quite sure my off-grid salesman, though, I'm not into the dollar signs, into the dollars aspect. But if you ask Brett, I've got a bloke who specifically does that sort of thing in off-grid, he will be able to give you the answer. The answer is yes, but I don't know it. There you go. So
somewhere between 75 cents and $1
Yeah.
per kilowatt hour.
There you
So
go.
it's not competitive with grid power at all. But if you consider that this is off-grid, not hybrid, but one of the main reasons that people go off-grid, other than lifestyle choices, is because of the extraordinary cost of connecting to the grid. So people are often getting quoted $30, $50, $100, $150,000 for connecting to the grid. So therefore, an investment in a large system of $50,000 or $60,000 one time is a good option.
Have you got projections of when you think that will be competitive with prices?
I think that will be a long, long time away. To reach grid parity between standalone power and off-grid, long decades out.
But not so, Stuart. I would have to pick you up on that with the change. Okay, the major cost of it is storage. Storage used to be 25% of it. Storage is now probably 60%, 50% of the cost. Batteries. With the development that's going on with batteries, you're going to see the same thing happen with the price of batteries. So I would suggest that it's going to come into its own. Because of the hybrid system, it will force a drop in power of the grid, but this may be years away.
Was there one more question?
Yeah, sorry.
And we'll forget.
I was just wondering if you had the experience of ceramic fuel cells and integrating them into systems.
I've had a small amount of experience with fuel cells. I worked with a company in Castle Hill. I've made one at home, and integration of them a minimal amount. Can you? Is there a
Well, just it seems to me that that's certainly better than the generator in your system that you're showing.
Yeah.
The fuel cell to replace the generator, especially if there's an ability to either take one or rather, if you've got a bank of fuel cells, for instance, say 3
Yes.
or 4 of them,
yes?
take one out so that you get some variability through day and night.
Yep.
Like that.
Fuel cells are the way of the future, and there's a really interesting book put out by the man that used to make the decision making on energy for the Clinton government. It's a yellow book. And it's called the Society. We are getting closer with fuel cells and the hydrogen society, but at this point in time they're still too expensive. Great for military applications, and very good, and I would suggest as renewables gets bigger and bigger you'll see the price drop and them become more, but at this point in time the work I've done with them, they were very expensive. That's
with the loads that Luke mentioned, that we've gone up to roughly 1 million installed systems now. Transgrid was predicting that we would have blackouts this last summer because of the additional loads, peak loads in the afternoon, air conditioning loads and that.
saved their
But
backside.
because there's so many solar systems now on the system, they only got to 70% of their load.
That's one of the problems. We're pumping that much power into the grid.
We as generators don't get the benefit of it, other than we don't get blackouts as often. But here's a major positive out of solar systems into society.
It is, yeah, and I'd like to close now, as I suggested. However, I do want to point out that attending ATA meetings in the Australian Solar Council, am I saying it right? Will give you a lot of insight to these, and some of the questions that are being raised today, there's a bit of information behind that we've had speakers over time talk about. For example, our ATA convener in Canberra has put a fuel cell system in. Now, Canberra lends itself to this because the fuel cell runs at a continuous 1.5 kilowatts, and he uses a cogeneration system to obtain the heat to do part of his heating. And so he's kind of forced to use a kilowatt and a half. And so this is where all the issues about feeding back in the grid and getting value and that stuff come into play. And one thing that I think has been fantastic that you've mentioned is that this concept of the financial pressure for the technology and batteries to evolve is so high that we're going to have some changes. And I think that there's a lot of people in the industry that haven't cottoned on to this. There's a big problem with the centralised distribution and the adoption of distributed power, like Luke's been telling us about the different options and especially a hybrid system. There's real issues about connecting the two. You know, the majority of the price rises we've had recently have been associated with poles and wires, and that's partly legislated. But one of the problems is this cost of poles and wires is for the old centralised system. So we've been forced to pay more even than the carbon tax on poles and wires, but what we're getting to buy for that is something which looks like coming around the corner. And as Luke has pointed out, if the price of batteries fall, if you don't have the 66 cents on your solar panels and you've just had your state government write off your feed-in tariff, why not just go off-grid? Bang, like that, because you've got the batteries. Quite a few of us will have to put more panels on, but the thing is that staying abreast of this can be done working with ATA and ACS, and you can keep abreast of that, and we have members and committee people who are trying and trialling all these things, and we do our best to bring them to ATA for you to find out about them. So I suppose we have to reinstate the Alternative Technology Association because we are talking about alternative technologies and ways of doing things. But look, I'd like to thank Luke once again, and please do come out and join us for some more snacks.
Thank you.